What happens when a 2026 pretty boy transmigrates into a 1952 tragedy? Davis was just a fan of BL stories by Key, but now he's living one. He's a lowly slave, the king hates him, and the concubines are bullies. Most people would cry, but Davis just decided to clock it. From roasting the king's mid-fits to making the entire royal court say, period, Davis is turning 1952 into his personal runway. Grab your headsets. The king's deep voice confusion is the best thing you'll hear all week. Chapter 1. The last thing Davis remembered was falling asleep to the tyrant's forbidden love on his phone, the narrator's voice describing some tragic slave getting whipped for the 15th time. He left a comment, "Bestie, just fight back. It's giving doormat energy." The universe apparently took that personally, because now Davis was face down in actual mud, his cheek pressed against cold stone, and someone was shrieking above him in the most grating voice he'd ever heard. "You worthless slave, you dare walk in my presence without bowing?" Davis blinked, once, twice. The hem of a truly unfortunate gown came into view. Burgundy velvet with gold trim that absolutely clashed with the woman's sallow complexion. The stitching was uneven. The color was oxidizing in the sunlight. Oh no. Oh no. This was a transmigration. Davis had read enough BL stories to know exactly what was happening. He was in a story. He was the tragic slave, and judging by the murderous look on Burgundy Gown's face, he was about to get slapped. "You will learn your place." The woman's hand rose, rings glinting. Something in Davis snapped. Maybe it was the audacity. Maybe it was the fact that her foundation was 3 shades too dark and caking in her pores. Maybe it was because he'd spent 26 years perfecting his comeback game, and he wasn't about to let some historical cosplayer with no blending skills ruin his face. His hand shot up and caught her wrist mid-swing. The courtyard went silent. Davis slowly stood, still gripping her wrist, and looked her up and down with the kind of assessment that made grown men cry at the cosmetics counter where he worked. "Honey," he said, voice dripping with concern that was absolutely not genuine. "This foundation is oxidizing. You're orange. It's giving Oompa Loompa energy, and not in a cute way." The woman's mouth fell open. Around them, other concubines gasped. Guards shifted uncomfortably. "And these sleeves," Davis continued, releasing her wrist to gesture at the puffed monstrosities attached to a dress. "Bestie, the 1950s called. They want their curtains back. This is not serving. This is mid at best." "How dare you? No, how dare you come for me when your blend line is literally visible from space? Where's your beauty blender? Oh wait, this is 1952. Y'all are still using what? Lead paint? Tragic." A deep voice cut through the chaos like a blade. What is the meaning of this? Every head turned, every knee bent, except Davis's. Because walking across the courtyard with the kind of presence that could only belong to a male lead was the most devastatingly beautiful man Davis had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they looked black. His hair was perfectly styled in that slick-back 1950s way, and his suit— Davis tilted his head. "Oh, so you're the ML. The suit is mid, but the face—" He made a chef's kiss gesture. "I can work with that. Clock it." The man, the king obviously, because of course he was, stopped walking. His expression was the definition of confusion mixed with affront, like someone had just told him the sky was actually purple. "What?" the king said slowly, voice so deep it practically vibrated the air. "What did you just say to me?" Davis put a hand on his hip. He was wearing literal rags, covered in mud, and somehow still looked like he was judging a fashion show. "Honey," I said, "your suit is mid. The tailoring is fine, but the color? Boring. You're a king, bestie. Where's the drama? Where's the moment? This is giving middle management, not monarchy." One of the guards made a choking sound. The king's jaw tensed. He took 3 steps forward, and suddenly he was right there, towering over Davis with the kind of presence that should have been terrifying. His eyes raked over Davis's face, clearly trying to find the fear, the submission, the trembling that every other slave showed him. Davis just smiled. "Personal space, Your Majesty. Ever heard of it? No? That explains the desperation I'm sensing. "You will address me properly," the king growled, "or I will have you whipped." "Whipping already?" Davis examined his nails, which were tragically dirty. "We haven't even had our first intimate conversation yet. You're moving fast. Kind of sus, if you ask me. Are you one of those MLs who falls first? Because I've read this trope. Kay did a whole series on it back in—" He stopped himself. "Never mind. You wouldn't get it." The king's hand shot out and gripped Davis's chin, forcing his face up. The touch burned, rough and commanding, and Davis felt his pulse kick up against his will. This close, he could smell leather and something darker, something that made his breath catch. "You will learn respect," the king said, his voice dropping to a growl that Davis felt in places that were absolutely inappropriate for a public courtyard. "Or you will learn pain." Davis met his eyes, unflinching. The king's pupils were dilated, his breathing slightly elevated. Oh, this was rich. This was beautiful. The ML was already hooked, and Davis had been transmigrated for approximately 4 minutes. "Bestie," Davis said softly, sweetly, "threatening me is not the serve you think it is. Also, your grip? A little too tight. We haven't negotiated boundaries yet. Red flag behavior. Not demure, not mindful, not cutesy." The king's grip loosened slightly, confusion flooding his features. "What language are you speaking?" "The language of someone who knows their worth." Davis pulled his chin free and stepped back, putting space between them, even though every nerve ending in his body was screaming at him to lean closer, to see what would happen if you pushed just a little more. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a glow-up to execute. These rags are not it." He turned on his heel and walked away, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtyard on his back. His heart was racing, his hands wanted to tremble, but he kept his spine straight, his walk confident, channeling every runway model he'd ever watched on YouTube. Behind him, he heard the king's voice, rough and bewildered. "What just happened?" And one of the guards, barely audible, I don't know, Your Majesty." Davis smiled. This was going to be fun. Chapter 2. King Alaric II stood on his private balcony, staring down at the servants' quarters with an expression that could have curdled milk. He was confused. King Alaric II was never confused. He was decisive, commanding, absolute. He had unified 3 kingdoms before his 30th birthday. He had crushed rebellions with a single order. Men trembled when he entered a room. Women simpered and competed for his attention. And yet, one mud-covered slave with the strangest speech pattern he'd ever heard had just looked him in the eye and called him mid, whatever that meant. "Your Majesty," his chief advisor, Lord Pemberton, approached cautiously. "About the incident in the courtyard." Alaric interrupted. "The slave, Arthur, I believe. He's been here for 3 months, purchased from the eastern markets. Prior owner reported him as problematic, refused to work, talked back constantly. Lady Cordelia requested him specifically, claimed she could break his spirit." Alaric's jaw tightened. Lady Cordelia was currently locked in her chambers, shrieking about disrespect and demanding Arthur be executed. The other concubines had joined her chorus, their voices a shrill cacophony that gave him a headache. "He doesn't seem very broken," Alaric observed. "No, Your Majesty. In fact, he seems rather spirited." That was an understatement. The slave, Arthur, had looked at Alaric like he was a particularly interesting insect, had commented on his clothing like he had any right to an opinion, had used words that made no linguistic sense whatsoever. And then there was the way he smiled, not the trembling, fearful smile of someone trying to appease, not the seductive smile of the concubines trying to entice, just confident, knowing, like he had a secret that amused him immensely. It was infuriating. It was also, Alaric was disturbed to realize, the most interesting thing that had happened to him in months. "Where is he now?" Alaric asked. "The servant's bathhouse, I believe. He requested, and I quote, proper skincare products because this castle's hygiene situation is giving medieval plague energy." Alaric pinched the bridge of his nose. "He requested?" "Yes, Your Majesty. He also told the head servant that if anyone touched his glow-up supplies, he would expose their crimes to the entire kingdom like a messy drama channel." I don't understand any of those words. Neither do we, Your Majesty. Alaric stood there for a long moment, staring at the bathhouse. He should have the slave punished, whipped, silenced. That's what a king did when faced with insubordination. And yet, have him brought to my private chambers tonight, Alaric heard himself say. Lord Pemberton's eyebrows shot up. Your Majesty? I will address his behavior personally. Of course, Your Majesty. Lord Pemberton bowed and left, but not before Alaric caught the tiny smile on the man's face. Alaric turned back to the balcony, gripping the stone railing. This was fine. He was in control. He would simply remind this Arthur of his place, establish dominance, and everything would return to normal. Except he couldn't stop thinking about the way Arthur's eyes had sparkled when he smiled, or the way his voice had gone soft when he'd said bestie, whatever that meant, or the curve of his neck when Alaric had gripped his chin. This was a problem that smelt like roses and had the audacity to critique royal fashion choices. Chapter 3. Davis stood in front of the cloudy mirror in the bathhouse and assessed the damage. The body he'd transmigrated into, Arthur's body, was actually kind of perfect, slim but toned, with delicate features and clear skin that just needed proper care. The hair was a disaster, though, all tangled and dull. Okay, Arthur, Davis muttered, running his fingers through the wet strands. Let's see what we're working with. He'd bullied the servants into giving him rose water, olive oil, and some crushed berries that would work as a lip and cheek stain. It wasn't Sephora, but he'd make it work. He always made it work. 2 hours later, Davis looked in the mirror and grinned. The hair was clean and styled into soft waves that framed his face. He'd used the olive oil as a leave-in treatment, and it caught the light beautifully. The rose water had tightened his pores. The berry stain gave his lips and cheeks a natural flush that looked effortlessly pretty. As for the clothes, Davis had taken the servant's rags and done some strategic ripping and knotting. The result was an off-the-shoulder top that showed his collarbones and a hint of his chest, paired with fitted pants that he'd cuffed to show his ankles. It was anachronistic as hell, but it was also undeniably stunning. He looked feminine, ethereal, dangerous. Period, he said to his reflection. I'm serving. A knock at the door made him turn. One of the guards stood there, looking distinctly uncomfortable. His Majesty requests your presence in his private chambers. Davis's grin widened. Oh, this was happening faster than he'd expected. Does he now? How delicious. Lead the way, bestie. The guard's expression suggested he'd never been called bestie in his life and didn't know how to process it. The walk through the palace was everything Davis had hoped for. Servants stopped and stared, guards forgot to guard. One concubine actually tripped over her own dress trying to get a better look. Davis didn't acknowledge any of them. He just walked like he owned the place, head high, hips swaying slightly, absolutely radiating main character energy. When they reached the king's chambers, the guard knocked and announced, Arthur, as requested, Your Majesty. Enter. Came that deep, commanding voice that made Davis's pulse quicken despite himself. The doors opened, and Davis stepped into luxury. The room was massive, dominated by a 4-poster bed that could fit 6 people. Tapestries hung on the walls, a fire crackled in an ornate fireplace, and standing in the center of it all, backlit by candlelight, was the king. He'd changed out of the mid-suit into something more casual, a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that Davis absolutely noticed, and fitted pants that showed off a build that was doing things to Davis's concentration. But it was the king's expression that made Davis want to laugh. Pure, unfiltered shock. The man was staring at Davis like he'd never seen another person before. Well, Davis said, doing a little spin, what do you think? I know the wardrobe options were limited, but I think I made it work. The off-shoulder is very Greek statue meets modern editorial, don't you think? The king's throat worked as he swallowed. What, he said slowly, are you wearing? Fashion, bestie. It's called having a vision. Davis walked further into the room, running his fingers along the back of a velvet chair. Though I have to say, your interior design is actually kinda snatched. The color palette is very moody romance. I approve. You approve, the king repeated flatly. "Mm-hmm." Davis turned to face him fully, leaning against the chair with calculated casualness. "So, you summoned me to your private chambers. Very suspicious. Very Chapter 5, The King's Desire. Should I be concerned, or are you going to try to seduce me with your smoldering intensity and complete lack of emotional intelligence?" A muscle jumped in the king's jaw. He took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. Davis's heart rate spiked, but he kept his expression bored, even as his body came alive with awareness. "You will address me with respect," the king growled. "I'll address you however I want until you earn my respect. So far, you've just been glowering and making vague threats. It's giving emotionally constipated ML who doesn't know how to communicate. Very Chapter 2 energy. We need to move the plot along, bestie." The king's hand slammed against the chair behind Davis's head, caging him in. They were inches apart now, and Davis could feel the heat radiating from the king's body, could smell leather and something spicy that made his head spin. "I could have you executed for this insolence," the king said, his voice so low it was almost a purr. Davis tilted his head, meeting those dark eyes without flinching. "But you won't, won't I?" "No, because you're curious. You've never met anyone who talks back to you. Everyone else just simpers and obeys, and you're bored out of your mind. But me," Davis smiled slowly, "I'm interesting, and you want to figure me out. You want to break me down and see what makes me tick. Except here's the thing, you can't break what's already unbreakable." The king's breathing had gone shallow. His eyes dropped to Davis's lips, then back up. "You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm playing the only game worth playing." Davis leaned in just slightly, just enough that their faces were barely an inch apart. He could feel the king's breath on his skin, could see the way his pupils had dilated until his eyes were almost black. "The question is, Your Majesty, can you keep up?" For a moment, the king just stared at him. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous thing that should have been terrifying. Davis felt his stomach flip. Oh, this was going to be so much fun. "We'll see," the king said softly, and stepped back, leaving Davis suddenly cold without his proximity. "You may go." Davis blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said you may go. Dismissed." "You summoned me here just to threaten me and then dismiss me? Bestie, that's bad storytelling. The pacing is all wrong." The king's smile widened. "Consider it a test. One you just failed." "Failed?" Davis sputtered. "You expected me to bend, to give in to whatever this is." The king gestured at Davis's entire existence. "But I am a king. I don't bend. Others bend to me. Remember that, Arthur." And with that, he turned and walked to his desk, effectively ending the conversation. Davis stood there for a moment, genuinely shocked. Then he laughed. "Oh, you think you're clever. Okay, I see you. This is going to be fun."
He sauntered to the door, paused, and looked back. The king was watching him with an expression Davis couldn't quite read. "By the way," Davis said sweetly, "your window treatments are tragic. The fabric is moth-eaten, and the color clashes with your wallpaper. We'll need to fix that. I'll send you my consultation fee." He left before the king could respond, closing the door on the sound of something heavy hitting wood. Mission accomplished. Chapter 4. Davis woke up the next morning with a plan. Well, several plans, but the main one involved turning this entire palace into his personal stage while systematically exposing every single concubine for the shady, conniving, BL trope-following villains they were. Because Davis knew the tropes, he'd listened to hundreds of hours of BL stories. He knew exactly what was coming. The framing would start today. He was in the gardens, pretending to work while actually judging the landscaping, severely lacking in aesthetic vision, when he heard the telltale sound of expensive shoes on gravel. Lady Cordelia, the head concubine, the one with the oxidizing foundation and the vendetta. Davis didn't even look up. "And here we go," he muttered. "In 3, 2, 1. "You!" Lady Cordelia's screech could have shattered glass. "What have you done?" Davis finally looked up, feigning confusion. "What have I done?" "Bestie, you're gonna have to be more specific. I've done a lot today. I reorganized the herb garden by aesthetic appeal rather than practical use. I critiqued the head chef's plating technique. I told 3 guards that their posture was giving shrimp energy. Which crime are we discussing?" Lady Cordelia's face was turning purple. She held up a shattered vase, one of the expensive ones from the king's collection. You broke this priceless artifact." "Did I, though?" Davis stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. "Because I've been in the garden all morning. The head gardener can confirm. Actually," he turned to the elderly gardener who was pretending to be absorbed in his roses. "Sir, have I left this garden at all this morning?" The gardener, who Davis had complimented yesterday on his absolutely snatched rose cultivation technique, shook his head. "No, young Arthur, you've been here the whole time." Lady Cordelia's eyes narrowed. "He's lying to protect you." "Or," Davis said, examining his nails, "you broke it yourself and are trying to frame me because you're desperate for the king's attention and see me as a threat. Which, fair, I am a threat. Look at me." He gestured to his outfit, another creation from servant's clothes, this time a wrapped crop top and high-waisted pants that showed off his figure. His hair was styled in loose waves, and he'd used berry stain to create a soft, flushed look that made him appear like he'd just been thoroughly kissed. Lady Cordelia was practically vibrating with rage. "The king will hear of this. You will be punished." "Oh, will I?" Davis tilted his head. "That's so weird because the king specifically told me last night that he finds me interesting." His exact words. Well, he said other things too, but we'll keep those between us. Privacy and all. It was a lie. Kind of. The king had definitely been interested, even if he'd been trying to hide it. But the effect on Lady Cordelia was immediate. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. "You're lying. His Majesty would never—" "Would never what? Notice that I'm literally the most beautiful person in this palace? Bestie, he's a king, not blind." Davis stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna take that vase and confess that you broke it yourself, because if you don't, I'm gonna tell the king about the little side business you've been running." Lady Cordelia froze. "What? Oh, you thought I didn't notice. Please. The mysterious shipments leaving the palace at night? The treasury discrepancies? The way you're always whispering with Lord Pemberton's assistant. I notice everything. It's called paying attention. Maybe you should try it. You have no proof. Yet I have no proof. But bestie, I'm patient. And when I expose you, it's going to be messier than your contour. Now run along. I have aesthetic improvements to make."
Lady Cordelia stared at him for a long moment, the vase trembling in her hands. Then she turned and fled, her dress trailing behind her like a particularly tragic cape. Davis turned back to the gardener, who was watching him with poorly concealed amusement. "So, about these roses, have you considered a more symmetrical arrangement? It would really elevate the visual impact." The gardener chuckled. "You're a strange one, Arthur." "Strange is just another word for unforgettable," Davis said, and went back to work. From his balcony 3 stories up, King Alaric watched the entire exchange, his expression unreadable. Chapter 5. Alaric couldn't stop thinking about him. It was becoming a problem. He tried everything, focusing on his duties, spending time with the concubines, who were somehow more irritating than usual, training with his guards. Nothing worked. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that smile, heard that strange, confident voice calling him bestie like they were equals. It was maddening. It was also, he was beginning to realize, exactly what he wanted. For years, everyone around him had been predictable. The nobles wanted power, the concubines wanted status, the servants wanted safety. Everyone played their role perfectly, and Alaric had mastered the game. But Arthur, if that was even his real name, because sometimes the way he spoke suggested he came from somewhere else entirely, didn't play the game. He made up his own rules and expected everyone else to follow. And somehow it was working. The servants adored him, the guards were protective of him. Even Lord Pemberton had mentioned that the boy has spirit with an approving tone. The concubines, however, were in revolt. "Your Majesty," Lady Cordelia said for the 15th time that week, "that slave is a danger to the entire court. He must be removed." Alaric looked up from his desk, where he'd been reviewing trade agreements and definitely not thinking about the way Arthur's collarbone had looked in that ridiculous off-shoulder creation. "A danger how, exactly?" "Your Majesty!" "Because Lord Pemberton did mention some irregularities in the treasury, and I have been noticing shipments leaving the palace at odd hours. I hadn't, actually, but Arthur's accusation had prompted me to look, and what I found was concerning." Lady Cordelia went very still. "I can explain—" "Don't." Alaric stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You will submit to a full audit of your finances. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. If you're not—" He let the thread hang. Lady Cordelia fled. Alaric stood there for a moment, then called for his guards. "Bring Arthur to me now." 20 minutes later, Arthur arrived, looking absolutely edible in another creation that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. This time it was a wrapped top that exposed one shoulder and fitted pants that were rolled up to show delicate ankles. "You summoned me, Your Majesty?" Arthur said, his tone suggesting he was doing Alaric a favor by showing up. "I've initiated an investigation into Lady Cordelia's activities based on information you provided." Arthur's face lit up. "Oh my God, that's so sexy of you. Finally using that big brain for something other than brood staring out windows. I'm proud." Alaric felt his eye twitch. "I am a king. I do not require your pride."
Everyone requires validation, bestie, even emotionally constipated monarchs. Arthur walked over to the window, running his fingers along the new curtains Alaric had ordered that morning. "Oh, you changed the window treatments. See, you can be taught. The velvet is much better, very Gothic romance. I approve." "You suggested it," Alaric found himself saying. "I did, and you listened. Character development." Arthur turned, and the sunlight caught his hair, making it glow. "So, is that why you summoned me? To tell me you're finally taking action against the toxic concubines?" "No." Alaric moved closer, drawn by some force he couldn't name. "I summoned you because I have questions." "Oh? This should be good." "Where are you from?" Alaric asked. "And don't say the Eastern markets. The way you speak, the things you reference, none of it makes sense for this time period." Arthur's expression shifted, becoming guarded for the first time. "Would you believe me if I told you?" "Try me." For a long moment, Arthur just looked at him. Then he laughed, but it sounded different, less performative, more real. "I'm from 2026, the future. I transmigrated into this body after falling asleep listening to BL stories. Yes, I know how insane that sounds. No, I can't prove it, but it's the truth." Alaric should have called him mad, should have had him examined by physicians, should have done anything except what he did, which was step closer and say, "BL stories? Boys' love, romance stories between men. This," Arthur gestured between them, "is literally a trope I've read 1,000 times. Powerful, emotionally repressed king falls for sassy, beautiful slave who doesn't fear him. It's a classic." "And how does it typically end?" Arthur's smile returned, sharp and knowing. "Oh, you know, the king becomes completely obsessed. The slave makes him work for every scrap of affection. There's a lot of tension, some dramatic misunderstandings, and eventually—" He stepped closer, close enough that Alaric could smell roses and something sweeter. "The king ends up on his knees, begging." Alaric's breath caught. They were too close now, the air between them electric. He could see the pulse racing in Arthur's throat, could see the way his pupils had dilated despite the confidence in his voice. "I don't beg," Alaric said roughly. "Not yet," Arthur whispered, "but you will."
Alaric's hand moved before he could think, cupping the back of Arthur's neck and pulling him closer until their faces were inches apart. Arthur's breath hitched, and Alaric felt a surge of triumph at getting a genuine reaction. "You're very certain of yourself," Alaric murmured. "I've read the script, remember?" But Arthur's voice wavered slightly. "I know how this ends." "Do you?" Alaric's thumb traced the line of Arthur's jaw, feeling him tremble. "Because I don't follow scripts, I make my own destiny." "Then make it," challenged Arthur, and there was heat in his eyes now, want that matched Alaric's own. "Or are you all talk?" It would have been so easy to close the distance, to claim that smart mouth and make Arthur say his name instead of Bestie, to prove that he was in control here, not this strange, beautiful, impossible man from the future. But Alaric had learned something from their last encounter. Arthur wanted to be chased, wanted the game. So, Alaric stepped back, watching Arthur's eyes go wide with disbelief. "Not yet," Alaric said, echoing Arthur's earlier words, "but soon, when you're ready to admit you want this too." Arthur gaped at him, actually gaped. "Did you just... You can't just... That's not how..." "Dismissed," Alaric said pleasantly. Arthur pointed at him, speechless, possibly for the first time since arriving. Then he spun on his heel and marched to the door, muttering what sounded like, "Playing my own game against me, the audacity, the absolute nerve, I taught him too well." The door slammed. Alaric sat down, his heart racing, a smile playing on his lips. This was the most fun he'd had in years.
Chapter 6. Davis spent the next 3 days absolutely losing his mind. The king was using his own tactics against him. His own tactics. It was brilliant. It was infuriating. It was working way too well. Every time Davis thought he had the upper hand, the king would pull back, leaving him wanting more. It was like the man had read every BL story ever written and decided to weaponize the hard-to-get trope. Well, two could play that game. Davis was in the king's study because apparently he just had access now. The guards didn't even question it anymore. Rearranging the books by color because the previous organizational system was giving chaos energy. The king walked in, stopped, and stared at the rainbow spines now decorating his shelves. "What," he said with impressive patience, "are you doing?" "Improving your space." The aesthetic was very, I organize by subject matter like a boring person. Now it's very, I have taste and understand visual flow. Davis didn't look up from his work. "You're welcome." "I can't find anything now." "Then you'll have to ask me for help, which means you'll have to be nice to me. It's called strategy, bestie." Davis finally turned and immediately regretted it because the king was in his casual clothes again, all rolled sleeves and fitted pants, and it was doing things to Davis's concentration. "Did you need something?" "This is my study." "And I'm improving it, multitasking." Davis hopped down from the ladder he'd been using and walked over to the king's desk, picking up a quill and examining it. "Also, we need to talk about your signature. The flourish is very dramatic, but it's illegible. What if someone needs to verify your documents?" The king's lips twitched. "Are you suggesting I make my signature easier to forge?" "I'm suggesting you have better penmanship. There's a difference." Davis set the quill down and perched on the edge of the desk, deliberately in the king's space. "Speaking of documents, I have a proposal." "Do you?" "I want you to issue a decree, mandatory skincare standards for the entire court. Everyone needs to wash their face twice daily, moisturize, and use sun protection. The amount of sun damage I'm seeing is tragic." The king stared at him. "You want me to issue a royal decree about skincare?" "Yes. Also, better fabrics. The synthetic adjacent materials some people are wearing are not breathable. And we need to address the hair situation. I've seen 3 people with split ends so bad I thought they were wearing wigs." "No." "No? That's not very cooperative of you." "I'm a king. I don't issue decrees about hair care." "Then I guess you don't get what you want either." Davis stood up and started walking toward the door. "And what do I want?" The king's voice was low, dangerous. Davis paused,
looked back over his shoulder and smiled. Me. You want me, but you can't have me until you start listening. So, about that decree. The king's jaw worked. He stared at Davis for a long moment, and I could practically see the internal struggle. Pride versus desire, control versus surrender. Finally, the king said, "If I issue this ridiculous decree, what do I get in return?" "Dinner. With me. Tonight, in your private dining room." Davis walked back toward him slowly. "And maybe, if you're very good, I'll tell you more about the future, about 2026, about all the things you're curious about." "That's all?" "That's all for now. See, bestie, you have to earn the rest, piece by piece, starting with—" He reached up and adjusted the king's collar, fingers brushing against his neck and feeling the king's pulse jump. "Learning how to compromise." The king's hand caught his wrist, holding it against his chest. Davis could feel his heartbeat, fast and strong. "You're playing a dangerous game. I thought we established I'm good at games. The question is, are you brave enough to play?"
The king's grip tightened. For a moment, Davis thought he might actually break, might close the distance and— "Fine," the king growled. "I'll issue your decree, but you will have dinner with me, and you will answer my questions. All of them." Davis pulled back, grinning. "See, you can be taught. Good boy." The king's eyes went dark. "Don't call me that." "Why not? You just did exactly what I wanted. That's very good boy behavior." Davis patted his chest and stepped away before the king could grab him again. "I'll see you at dinner. Wear something nice. Not the brown suit. Never the brown suit." He left before the king could respond, his heart racing, his skin tingling where they'd touched. This was working. The king was bending. Soon he'd break, and Davis was going to enjoy every second of it. Chapter 7. The decree went out the next morning. By order of His Majesty King Alaric II, all members of the royal court are required to maintain proper hygiene standards, including but not limited to daily facial cleansing, moisturizing, and protection from excessive sun exposure. Failure to comply will result in educational sessions on proper self-care. The palace was in chaos. Davis had never been prouder. "He actually did it," one of the servants whispered as Davis walked past. "He issued a decree about skin care because of you." "Of course he did," Davis said, examining his nails. "I'm very persuasive." What Davis didn't mention was the dinner that had followed the agreement. 3 hours of the king asking questions about the future while trying not to stare at Davis's mouth. Questions about technology, society, fashion, everything. And Davis had answered, watching the king's fascination grow with each revelation. It had ended with the king walking Davis back to his quarters, their hands brushing in the hallway, neither of them pulling away. The king had looked at him like he wanted to devour him, but he'd been a perfect gentleman, had said good night and left. Davis had spent the next hour lying in bed, replaying every moment, every touch, every heated look. But today was important. Today was the banquet. Foreign dignitaries were visiting, and the king was required to show off his court, which meant the concubines would be in full force trying to impress, which meant drama was inevitable. Davis had planned accordingly. He'd spent 2 days creating his outfit. The servants had helped, enchanted by his vision. The result was a fitted jacket with strategic cutouts, paired with high-waisted pants that hugged his curves and showed off his waist. He'd lined his eyes with crushed coal, stained his lips berry red, and styled his hair in waves that looked effortlessly tousled. He looked like sex and power and everything in between. When he entered the banquet hall, the room went silent. Every single person stopped talking. Davis smiled and walked forward like he was on a runway, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. He could feel every eye on him, could hear the whispers starting. "Who is that?" "That's Arthur, the slave, but he can't be a slave. Look at him." Davis made his way to his assigned seat at the far end of the table because he was still technically a servant, and sat down with perfect posture. The king was staring at him from the head of the table. Just staring.
His expression was unreadable, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his goblet. Lady Cordelia, seated much closer to the king, looked like she wanted to commit murder. Perfect. The banquet began, and Davis played his role perfectly. When the foreign dignitary spoke, he listened with genuine interest. When they made jokes, he laughed at exactly the right moments.
When they asked him questions, he answered with charm and wit that had them leaning closer, fascinated. "You're quite articulate for a servant," one dignitary said. "Oh, I'm full of surprises," Davis replied, taking a sip of wine. "For example, did you know that your cravat is tied in a Windsor knot? Very classic, very sophisticated. It's giving, I understand the importance of presentation. I respect it." The dignitary blinked. "I thank you? You're welcome. Though between us," Davis leaned in conspiratorially, "the color is a bit matchy-matchy with your waistcoat. Next time, try a contrast. It'll make your features pop. Trust me, I know aesthetics." The dignitary looked delighted. "You know, I think you're right. What do you think of—" And just like that, Davis had the entire foreign delegation eating out of his hand. He complimented their fashion choices when they were good, serving international elegance, gently critiqued when they needed help. "Bestie, that ruffled collar is very I got lost in a fabric store. Maybe simplify." And generally charmed everyone at the table. Except the concubines. They looked ready to riot. Halfway through the meal, Lady Cordelia stood up. "Your Majesty, I must protest. This person is embarrassing the court with his familiar behavior towards our honored guests." The room went quiet. Davis took another sip of wine, completely unbothered. The king's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Sit down, Lady Cordelia." "But, Your Majesty," I said, "sit down." There was steel in his voice, the kind that made kingdoms fall. "Arthur has shown our guests more genuine courtesy and interest than anyone else at this table. If you have a problem with that, you may leave." Lady Cordelia sat down so fast her chair scraped. Davis caught the king's eye and smiled. The king's expression softened just for a moment before returning to his usual stern mask. But Davis had seen it, the pride, the possessiveness, the want. The king was falling hard. "Now then," Davis said, turning back to the dignitaries as if nothing had happened. "You were telling me about the trade routes in your kingdom. I have some thoughts on optimization." The rest of the banquet was a triumph. By the end of the night, 3 dignitaries had asked if Davis could visit their kingdoms as a consultant, 2 had offered him positions in their courts, and 1 had asked if he was available for marriage. The king had nearly shattered his goblet at that last one. As the guests departed, the king stood and said, "Arthur, my chambers now." Davis stood gracefully, smiled at the shocked concubines, and followed the king out of the hall. This was going to be interesting. Chapter 8. The king's chambers had become familiar territory for Davis over the past few weeks. But tonight felt different. The air was charged, electric, heavy with everything unspoken between them. The king closed the door and turned to face Davis, his expression unreadable. "You," he said slowly, "are going to be the death of me." Davis leaned against the wall, all calculated casualness, even though his heart was racing. "That's very dramatic. Are you going to elaborate, or are we doing the smoldering silence thing? Because I should warn you, I'm very comfortable with silence. I can outwait anyone." 3 marriage proposals in one night. I know, I'm very desirable. It's the bone structure and the personality. Devastating combination. The king took a step forward. "You had the entire delegation enchanted. You made visiting royalty laugh. You gave fashion advice to a duke." "I did. He needed it. That ruffled collar was a crime." "And through it all," the king continued, voice dropping lower, "you kept looking at me, like you were checking to see if I was watching." Davis's breath caught. "Were you?" "I haven't stopped watching you since you arrived." The king moved closer, and Davis's pulse kicked up. "You've turned my court upside down. You've made me issue decrees about skincare. You've exposed corruption I didn't know existed.
You've made me laugh for the first time in years, and now you're receiving marriage proposals like you're a prince instead of a slave. Technically, I'm still a slave on paper, Davis pointed out. We should probably fix that. The optics are terrible. I'm freeing you. Davis blinked. What? Tomorrow, I'm issuing your freedom papers. You'll no longer be a slave. You'll be... The king paused, and for the first time, Davis saw uncertainty in his eyes. What do you want to be? It was the first time the king had asked what Davis wanted, had given him a choice. Davis's throat felt tight. I want to finish what I started. The concubines, they're still here, still causing problems, still stealing from your treasury. The investigation is complete. Lady Cordelia and 3 others were embezzling funds, selling royal artifacts, using their positions to run smuggling operations. You were right about all of it. Of course I was. I'm very observant. Davis pushed off the wall. So what happens now? They're being arrested tomorrow, banished from the kingdom. Their assets will be seized, and their accomplices in the palace will be removed. The king's eyes gleamed. Your revenge, as you called it, is complete. Davis felt a surge of satisfaction. Excellent. I'll prepare a statement. Something like, the tea was exceptionally hot today, wasn't it? Very casual, very devastating. The king actually laughed. It was a rich, warm sound that made Davis's stomach flip. You're ridiculous. I'm iconic. There's a difference. Davis stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were sharing air. So, about this freedom thing. What comes after? The king's hand came up to cup Davis's face, thumb tracing his cheekbone with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. That depends. What do you want to come after? Davis leaned into the touch, his carefully constructed walls cracking just slightly. I still haven't answered my questions from the first day. What questions? Are you one of those MLs who falls first? Davis whispered. Because I've been keeping track. The staring, the jealousy at dinner, the way you clench your jaw every time someone compliments me. The skincare decree. That's some serious I'm falling and I can't stop energy. The king's thumb moved to trace Davis's lower lip, and Davis had to fight not to shiver. I fell the moment you called my suit mid and didn't flinch when I tried to intimidate you. I knew it, Davis breathed. I knew you were hooked. Completely. The king's voice was rough, honest. You terrify me. You challenge everything I thought I knew about myself. You make me want things I didn't know I could want. And He paused, jaw working. I don't want you to leave. Then ask me to stay. That's not enough. I don't want you as a freed slave living in the palace. I don't want you as a consultant or advisor or any other safe title. The king's other hand came up to frame Davis, holding him like something precious. I want you as my equal, my partner, your queen? Davis supplied with a grin. I was going to say the most important person in my life, but yes, that too, if you'll have me. Davis had imagined this moment hundreds of times. In every BL story he had listened to, the powerful ML always had some grand speech, some dramatic declaration. But this felt real, raw, vulnerable, in a way that made Davis's chest ache. I have conditions, Davis said. The king smiled. Of course you do. First, we're renovating this entire palace. The decor is I inherited this from my dead relatives and never changed anything. We need a vision. Agreed. Second, I get full authority over court fashion. No more tragic sleeve situations, no more clashing colors. Everyone needs a style consultation. Done. Third, you have to tell me I'm obsessed with me at least once a day. I need the validation. The king laughed again, and it was the most beautiful sound Davis had ever heard. I think I can manage that. I'm obsessed with you.
See, you're a natural. Davis looped his arms around the king's neck. And fourth, you have to kiss me. Right now, because if you don't, I'm going to lose my mind. That, the king murmured, leaning in until their lips were barely touching, I can definitely do. When their lips met, it was like every BL story Davis had ever listened to come to life.
The king kissed like a man starving, like Davis was air and water and everything necessary for survival. His hands were in Davis's hair, tilting his head for better access, and Davis melted into it, into him, into the sensation of finally getting what he'd been wanting for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Davis grinned. Okay, that was very good. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. The king's laugh rumbled through both of them. You're impossible. And you're obsessed with me. It works. Chapter 9. The next morning, Davis woke up in the king's bed, wrapped in silk sheets and the kind of post-makeout glow that could light up a city. They hadn't gone further than kissing. The king had been surprisingly restrained, had said he wanted to do this right, which was very sweet and very frustrating because Davis had been ready to take things much further. But lying there, watching the early morning light filter through the new curtains, a soft cream that Davis had insisted on, he felt content, happy even, until the king walked in with a decree in his hand and a stern expression. "We need to talk," he said. Davis sat up, pulling the sheet around him. That's never a good start to a conversation. "I've been thinking about your safety. The concubines are being removed today, but there will be others who resent your position, who see you as a threat." The king sat on the edge of the bed. "I want to keep you here, in the palace, where I can protect you." I felt alarm bells go off in my head. Protect me? By keeping me locked up? By keeping you safe. Alaric. It was the first time Davis had used his actual name, and the king's eyes widened slightly. That's very possessive ML who thinks he knows best of you, and not in a cute way, in a red flag way. I know what you want, but what you want doesn't override what I need. Davis stood up, wrapping the sheet around himself like a toga. I'm not some delicate flower that needs to be locked in a tower. I'm the person who took down your entire concubine system in 3 weeks. I think I can handle myself. The king stood too, frustration clear on his face. You don't understand the dangers. No, you don't understand. This, Davis gestured between them, this only works if we're equals, not if you make decisions for me, not if you try to control where I go or what I do. Davis walked to the wardrobe and started pulling out clothes. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to leave for 2 days, maybe 3. I'm going to go into town, see the kingdom, prove that I can exist outside this palace without your constant supervision. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes. Davis turned to face him. And when I come back, we're going to have a conversation about boundaries and trust and all the things healthy relationships need. Because right now, you're giving me emotionally constipated control freak energy, and we're not doing that. The king's jaw worked. You would just leave after everything? I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving the palace for 2 days to prove a point. Davis walked over and put his hand on the king's chest. This is what trust looks like, bestie. You let me go and I come back. That's how this works. What if something happens to you? Then I'll handle it, like I've been handling everything since I got here. Davis stood on his toes and kissed the king's cheek. Have some faith in me. The king grabbed his wrist, not hard, but firm. I don't like this. I know, but you're going to let me do it anyway because you're learning and because you know I'm right. Davis pulled away and continued getting dressed. Besides, absence makes the heart grow fonder. You'll miss me desperately, realize you can't live without me, and when I come back, you'll be completely whipped. I'm already whipped, the king muttered. Davis grinned. I know, it's very cute. Now, are you going to pout, or are you going to kiss me goodbye? The king pulled him close and kissed him thoroughly, desperately, like he was trying to memorize the taste of him. When they finally broke apart, his voice was rough. 2 days, not 3. 2 days, Davis agreed. And when I come back, we're talking about your abandonment issues. I don't have abandonment issues. Bestie, you tried to lock me in a palace. We're unpacking that. Davis grabbed his bag and headed for the door. Oh, and while I'm gone, work on your communication skills. We're going to need them. He left before the king could respond, his heart light, despite the intensity of the conversation. This was healthy. This was right. This was how relationships were supposed to work, even if the king looked like someone had just stolen his favorite possession. Chapter 10. Davis spent 2 days exploring the kingdom, and it was glorious. The people were kind, the markets were vibrant, the fashion was terrible but fixable. He gave unsolicited style advice to at least 20 people, started a trend of wraparound tops, and somehow became a minor celebrity in the lower districts. But by the end of day 2, he missed the king, missed his deep voice, missed the way he looked at Davis like he was the center of the universe, missed the verbal sparring and the heated glances and the potential of what they could be together. So he went back. The palace was in chaos when he arrived. Guards were running around, servants looked frantic, and at the center of it all was the king, standing in the main hall, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Davis, he froze. Then he was moving, crossing the hall in long strides, and before Davis could say anything, the king had pulled him into a crushing embrace. "Never again," the king said into Davis's hair. "Never leave like that again." Davis hugged him back, feeling the tension in the king's body. "I told you 2 days. It was the longest 2 days of my life," the king pulled back, cupping Davis's face in his hands. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, kept imagining all the things that could go wrong. Lord Pemberton told me I was being ridiculous, but you were being ridiculous, but also very sweet. Did you miss me?" "Desperately." "Did you realize you can't live without me?" "Completely." "Are you going to get on your knees and beg me to stay forever?" The king smiled, that dangerous, beautiful smile that made Davis's stomach flip. And then, in front of the entire court, he dropped to one knee. The hall went silent. "Davis," the king said, using his real name for the first time, "or Arthur, or whatever name you choose to go by, I am completely, irrevocably obsessed with you. You've turned my life upside down, challenged everything I thought I knew, and made me happier than I've ever been. I don't want to control you. I want to support you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and hear you critique my fashion choices. I want to watch you revolutionize court aesthetics and confuse foreign dignitaries with your strange future language. I want—" his voice cracked slightly. "I want you to choose me every day, the way I choose you." I felt my eyes burning. This was it, the grand finale, the moment every BL story led to. "Stand up," he said softly. The king stood. Davis stepped close, reached up, and pulled him down into a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he smiled. "I choose you too, on one condition. Anything. We're taking a .5 photo with that magical mirror in your chamber. I need documentation of this moment for posterity." The king laughed, pulled Davis close again, and whispered, "I don't know what that means, but yes."
Perfect. Also, we're redecorating the throne room. The color scheme is very dusty medieval. We need to modernize. Of course we do. And we're establishing a royal fashion council. I'll chair it. Naturally. And you have to tell me I'm beautiful at least 3 times a day. The king's expression softened. "You're beautiful. You're breathtaking. You're the most stunning person I've ever seen." He leaned in, lips brushing Davis's ear. "And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly how beautiful I think you are." Davis shivered, heat pooling in his stomach. "Is that a promise?" "It's a guarantee." Around them, the court was whispering. The concubines, the few that remained, looked scandalized, and Lord Pemberton was smiling like this was the best entertainment he'd had in years. Davis didn't care about any of it. He just pulled the king close and whispered, "By the way, the tea is exceptionally hot today." The king's laugh rumbled through both of them, warm and perfect and home. Epilogue, 1 year later. The palace had been transformed. Gone were the dark, oppressive colors. In their place were soft neutrals, vibrant accent walls, and what Davis called a cohesive aesthetic vision that honors tradition while embracing modernity.
The Royal Fashion Council met monthly and had revolutionized court dress standards. The mandatory skincare decree was celebrated kingdom-wide, and Davis's clean boy aesthetic had spread to neighboring kingdoms, making him an unlikely style icon across the continent. But the best part was the king. Alaric had learned to communicate, to trust, to let Davis have his independence while still showing his devotion in 1,000 small ways. Morning kisses, handwritten notes, public declarations of obsession that made Davis blush every time. And tonight, in their shared chambers, decorated in soft grays and warm golds, exactly as Davis had envisioned, they lay tangled together, the king's fingers tracing patterns on Davis's skin. "I'm obsessed with you," Alaric murmured, as he did every day. Davis smiled against his chest. "I know. You've ruined me for everyone else. That was the plan. I would do anything for you." "I know that too." Davis tilted his head up to meet Alaric's eyes. "You're very whipped." "Completely." Alaric kissed him softly, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." Davis had transmigrated into a tragedy and turned it into a romance, had taken a story about a hated slave and made it a tale of revolution, love, and the power of being unapologetically yourself. Not bad for a BL-obsessed fan from 2026. "Hey, Alaric," Davis said. "In my time, there's this thing called a happily ever after. And I think we found it." Alaric's arms tightened around him, and Davis felt the smile against his hair. "We absolutely did." And somewhere in 2026, on a YouTube channel called BL Stories by K, a new story was being uploaded about a sassy, beautiful man who transmigrated into the past and made a king fall to his knees. The comments section was going wild.
The end.
Thank you for listening to this BL story. Don't forget to subscribe to BL Stories by K for more transmigration chaos, sassy protagonists, and kings who are absolutely whipped. Period.